Mine is a story of forgiveness beyond my own. I was married. She took my husband. She was for me a husband thief. And there I was with small children. My husband left me for her, and it was so painful that it is still a truly unbelievable story for me, even today. So I was a divorced woman living with my children. I had 4 who were quite young at the time, and a 5th who was already grown and heading out on their own. Once during the evening prayer, one of the little ones spoke up, telling me, "You pray for Daddy, but you never pray for Françoise," who was, of course, his partner. He could not understand how difficult it was, how heavy a burden it was for me to even think of blessing this woman, to imagine praying for her. It was really beyond thinking of. However, as he asked me that question, I felt that it must certainly be the Lord working through this child. I realized then that not only my children were listening to me and waiting for me to answer, but also the Lord who had spoken to me through this child. So I made the effort and I said, "Lord, please bless Françoise." I remember only being able to say that much. And for days and days while praying with the children, I added, "Lord, please bless Françoise." And then gradually it happened. I can say now that I believe I changed during this time. Some change was happening within me. And while at the same time, I felt I was not really in charge of my actions, that it wasn't truly my own efforts, but rather it was happening all on its own. Then I could say, take care of her, help her to be a good mom, help her to take care of my children when they're at their home, and other things like that. And I was surprised. I thought, maybe this is what it means to forgive, that is, saying kind things about her. I searched my own heart at the same time, asking myself what was happening to me. Why? I can say from my heart that a sort of benevolence was within me that was obviously not there before. Since I'd been trespassed against, I would have preferred to reject or hate her or something like that, but things had changed little by little. And it was a very welcome change, because sometime after that, after the beginnings of my benevolent feelings toward her, she got sick. It was very serious. She became very seriously ill. She had cancer. She was expecting her 3rd child at the time, and that meant that her breast cancer evolved very aggressively and severely. It lasted for 2 years, and so our prayers, or rather my prayers, became much more fervent, more sincere, truer. She was sick, was a sick mother, and I felt sorry for her, a feeling that obviously would not have been possible only a year before. But truly, with all my heart, I could say, "Lord, please help her, rescue her." And then one day she was hospitalized, and while she was undergoing surgery, I fell. I fell going to the market and shattered my elbow. Now I have an artificial elbow, but this fractured elbow brought me into the hospital, and I was placed in a ward just a few corridors away from her. It was really quite incredible. I thought, but why, Lord, did you do this? Why this amazing coincidence? I fall the day she's operated on, and I'm just a few corridors from her room? And it was then I realized that the Lord simply wanted me to pray for her and feel a sense of communion with what she was going through. I realized that He brought us together. In fact, in some ways, our suffering brought us together. though it was different, he was trying to create a sense of communion. So indeed, I prayed for her. My own situation worsened somewhat as my elbow was shattered and I needed another surgery. And there it is. And so I suffered. And every time this suffering brought me closer to her instead of staying mired in my own misery. No, I felt a communion with her suffering, even though it was probably infinitely greater emotionally than my own. I found myself sometime after that in a rehabilitation center, and not 2 steps from it was a place of worship which brought together the sick. Just when I happened to be there, thousands of sick people, really a huge gathering, and there was a large Eucharist in which I joined, and during this Eucharist, I really held Françoise in my heart, and I said, Lord, here and now, I solemnly ask that you heal her. There was a long silence, and in that silence, I heard a voice. Not with my ears, but still I'm absolutely sure that it was true, that it was the Lord who answered me. I will not cure her. Another silence followed, and then, but what do you want? What do you truly want? I felt utterly disappointed because the Lord had refused my request and said he would not heal her. And I thought that was awful, but what do you truly want? And so I thought, goodness, if her life really is at an end, well, then at least the Lord should take her and that everything should be erased. And so I told him, when she comes to face your judgment, when she comes to you, then delete all her sins toward me. As for the rest of her life, I had no right to intervene and ask for anything. But as for myself, I absolutely have that right. And indeed, I said, Lord, erase everything that concerns me. Let her not be judged upon it. And immediately I felt a joy. I asked myself where it stemmed from, this joy. Was it the Lord who was happy because of what I just told him? Or was it the Lord helping me to feel what she was living with? And I got the feeling it was a little of both, you know. Some time passed, and I was working at the time in a hospital. One day, I was in a liver transplant department, and therefore was fully decked out in sterile garb and equipment. And I'd been having the feeling for quite a while, months or weeks maybe, that I would write to Françoise. I didn't even know what I would write to her, but I felt this certainty. And right in that moment, while I was totally garbed up, I knew that I had to write. It was as if the Lord was telling me, now. So, all right, I removed everything and I went down to the hospital cafeteria where I bought a postcard. And on the corner of a table, I wrote what I didn't even know I was going to say. I didn't know what I was going to write about and just figured it out as I wrote. It was very short. It was just a postcard. And I simply wrote, don't be afraid. You can go. The Lord will take care of your children. And then that same evening, I showed it to my ex-husband. She was in the hospital and things were very bad at that point. He read the card and he told me, I'll give it to her this evening. The next morning, very early, he phoned me and he told me that she'd died that night, but that she'd had the time to read my card. And then I was at her funeral service afterwards. And at the funeral, there was also a monk to whom I'd introduced Françoise. You see, Françoise had asked me one day, I'd met her by chance at the door to a physiotherapist's office, and she had asked if I knew anyone who'd be willing to accompany her through her illness, someone Christian. I didn't know, or rather, I didn't believe she was a Christian, but, you know, she may have felt the need for faith as she was so very ill. So I gave her the name of a friend, a monk. And at the burial, the monk was also there, and he told me, yes, she did indeed grow her faith over the past year since I first met with her. And she told me that it was you who'd brought her into the fold. But what do you mean? And he said, because she learned from the children who were traveling between my home and theirs, well, in fact, my former home. She found out that we prayed for her as a family. And she told the monk that it was impossible. Only if God truly existed could it be possible, but definitely not otherwise. And that was what had awakened her faith, simply that. I had no idea, but it had brought her closer to God. And it was wonderful to hear this monk telling me that. And also that day, one of her friends came to me at the burial, and she gave me a letter that Françoise had written to me a couple of weeks earlier. She must have sensed that she was nearing the end, as she wrote me a fairly short letter, but it said, and this was very important to me, she said, I'll be meeting a friend soon, and it is you who helped me to know this friend. And of course, she meant Jesus Christ. And it was then that I understood that I'd had a friend that I didn't even realize, and that she'd been a sister in Christ, and that she was dead. I could not even say to her, hello, sister in Christ. I had simply not known. And there you have it.